and welcome to this video. My name is Eva, and in this video I will talk about boundaries. It's an amazing topic, super important, and it will be actually a 2-video series because if not it would just be too much information. So this video will be about what are boundaries, why are they important, and why should we actually set them, and what happens if we don't set them. And yeah, so huge topic, important topic. And I also want to say, it's a huge topic, so people write books about it that are 500 pages each, so you can talk so much about it. So it will never be enough to put in one video. So this video will just be to give you an insight, inspiration, information. Yeah, so what are boundaries? There are different definitions, and what worked for me the most to understand boundaries is to see them like fences. So for example, you have the fence to keep the bad ones out and the good ones in. So for example, you have a house, a garden, and then you make a fence around the garden because you have children and you want them to play in the garden without strangers seeing them or without maybe a street dog attacking the child. So it's a protection for your family, for yourself, and is it an analogy? I don't know. Like that kind of comparison really helps to set it also into the real life. So for example, one example of a boundary in real life would be if you're in a relationship and you have someone not treating you correctly. For example, he's lying to you, or he or she is lying to you, or he or she is whatever cheating. Then you can say, hey, this is not okay, this is overstepping my boundaries. And then you can say, if you do it again, then I will leave, or I will already leave now. So an action that you take, that is a boundary. So really important. That's also something that I could learn, is that a boundary is not about the other person. So I can never control a behavior of another person. I cannot say, hey, stop lying, because I cannot control others. I can just control my own reaction to the situation. In that case, for example, leave the relationship, move to a different apartment, move out. Exactly. So to always go back to what can you do. So that is super important, and that is really important. So your personal boundaries are super important to keep relationships intact, because what happens if you constantly overstep your own boundaries, and if you don't set your own boundaries, and if you don't know what your boundaries are, it can happen that you first develop a lot of resentment. So you can say, for example, you really don't want to do something and your partner wants you to do it, and you know this is, I don't feel good about it, but you still keep doing it all the time. You subconsciously over time can develop a lot of resentment for your partner, and it's not fair because your partner might not even know that it's a boundary that he's overstepping. And resentment is really the number one threat for a relationship, that it will break. So yeah, so the goal is always to keep resentment low, and we can achieve that by actually taking responsibility for setting our own boundaries and maintaining them. So that is super helpful, helped me a lot to understand the concept of boundaries. Focus on your own actions, take responsibility for setting your own boundaries, and actually maintain them. Or for example, in a work context, you have a co-worker who you communicated before with to and you have a certain deadline, and you say, hey, please send me that project by Friday morning, and this person didn't do it, and instead they text you on Friday afternoon, hey, please review my project. I couldn't send it to you earlier, but you know that for you it will take away from your time with your children, from your family, so it will take away from your time. It's your responsibility to set a boundary and to say, there's always exception to the rule. For example, maybe that person has lost a dad or whatever it is, but in the normal case, it's your responsibility to set a boundary and to say, hey, no, I have sent you a deadline, you have not respected that boundary, so I cannot, I have a weekend for my family, I will review your project on Monday, but it might be too late. So it's your responsibility to set your boundary. Really important. And Also, there are different types of boundaries. I already mentioned two. So the first of one is in context of often in terms of relationships, when someone is not really respecting your mental health, is treating you not correctly, or for example is not respecting your health on the example of the work environment, because you have the right to spend the weekend with your family, if you have planned it that way. So it's again your responsibility to make a boundary around that, to make a fence around your time with your family and communicate to your colleague, hey, you have not regarded my boundary, so I will still keep strong in my boundary. Another one is of course sexual. So if for example you are with your partner and you really don't want to have sex that night and your partner wants to, it's your responsibility to say, hey, I don't want to. Or also, and hopefully your partner will listen. And physically as well, for example, you're in you have maybe experienced something difficult and someone wants to give you a hug, but you really don't like physical contact. It's your responsibility to say, hey, I much rather not like to have a hug, and that is completely fine. So always come back to, how do I feel? Do I feel uneasy about that? It's always, you have always the right to communicate that and to set a boundary and say, hey, I much rather not like to have a hug, if that's okay, and if that person still gives you a hug, to avoid that person. So yeah, so another one is emotional. That is, for example, one, if someone crossed the boundary in a way that he, for example, belittled you or made you feel inferior or small, it's your responsibility. Obviously, always if you have the opportunity. So if you're a child, you probably don't have much choices in many cases, but if you have the opportunity to do so, set a boundary of saying, hey, my partner is not treating me correctly, I have to end that relationship, and I have to communicate with my partner about that, and if that doesn't stop, I have to end the relationship and leave. And also financial, that could also be another one, and intellectual as well. So for example, you're a Muslim and you believe in your God, and then you enter maybe a relationship or a workplace situation and your boss or your partner say, hey, you cannot wear maybe clothes that you want to wear for your religion, or you cannot pray or whatever it is, then it's your responsibility to say, okay, there's a value conflict, this is not for me, I will try to find a different partner, or try, if it's possible, to find a different workplace, to set your boundary with that. Or even for me, for example, I'm vegan, so I don't eat any meat, and I keep that boundary. So no matter if someone gives me meat, then I don't eat it. That's my boundary. And if someone keeps pushing me, then I know this person doesn't respect my boundary. That person is respectless. How do you say in English? It doesn't respect me. So I need to avoid that person if possible. So these are different types of boundaries. Why is it so hard to set boundaries for some people? I mean, for some people it's a little bit easier, for some people a little bit harder. Different reasons. What I've learned for me is that, first of all, it's a lot usually, or very common usually, when you grew up in a certain family environment that didn't model you how boundaries work. So for example, a narcissistic family system, or maybe a family system where one parent had an addiction to whatever, alcohol or whatever it was. So that could happen, where all needs are catered to that one parent, and your needs as a child didn't matter, so you just didn't know what boundaries are and how to set them, because you never learned that. But you can still learn that later when you're an adult. It's a skill, it's not something magical, it's just a skill that you can learn, how to say no and how to identify your own emotions and needs. It's really just a skill that you can learn. So that can happen. Or maybe it's also a little bit your personality type, could also work. Some specifics would be, for example, the superhero syndrome, that you think, oh, you want to do everything on your own. So for example, and you can achieve everything on your own, and just because you can achieve everything on your own doesn't mean that it's good for your mental health. So for example, in work context, if you have a project and it's a huge workload and you're overwhelmed and you know I can make it if I work every weekend, for example, it doesn't mean that you have to. So maybe a boundary to set would be, because you also with your actions in some ways you teach other people. So if you say, if you manage that project but you sacrificed all of your personal relationships for that project, you also teach your co-workers or maybe your boss that you don't have any hobbies and that you don't have any self-respect for yourself, and that you prioritize work over your own sanity in a way. So so that can hinder you if you think that you can do everything alone, because just because you can doesn't mean that you have to. You could say, I mean, always depends of course, but you could potentially say to your coworker or to your boss, hey, this is too much of a workload, I cannot manage it. Exactly. And another one is perfectionism, if you have the need to have control. So if you say, oh, if I do those things, then I'm in control. Another one could be secondary gain. So that is also a little bit difficult sometimes to understand. But for example, if you're a guy and you live with your parents, but you're already 25 and you would love for yourself to create some more independence, that, for example, you don't want your mom to clean up your room because you feel like she's invading your personal space and you really want to have your own personal space, and you say to your mom, hey, listen, or but you don't really say something to your mom. That could be one option. You don't really say something to your mom because still, even though it feels uncomfortable for you, in some ways you profit from it because you don't have to clean your room by yourself. But of course the harm is much more bigger because you might not learn how to be self-independent. So once you actually move out, maybe if you found a job or you finish your studies, once you actually move out, you might not know how to clean your room. So yeah, that's really important to understand if there is potentially a secondary benefit, and to understand that the secondary benefit is not as big as the benefit of actually setting a boundary. And the last one is disease to please. So there's also no shame on that. But if you, for example, notice that it's very hard for you to say no, and you always say yes to people, even though it costs you your own personal space, your own mental health, remember that you have the right to say no, and it's just a muscle that you can grow, and you can start with small things. So for example, someone offers you chocolate and you don't want to eat chocolate because you want to, for example, you're on a diet, whatever it is, then you can say no to the chocolate, and then once you practice that muscle, you can get higher to, for example, if you have a mother who's overstepping boundaries, you can implement boundaries with your mother. So really important. And that's the last thing for this video, is that there's no shame if you don't know how to set boundaries. You might just not have learned it in childhood. So it's like a muscle that you have to train and you have to learn how to do it. But once you learn it, it gets easier. And also, there's also no shame if you can set boundaries in certain environments. For example, in work, you can clearly say, hey, this is my boundary. But for example, in relationships, it's very hard for you to set boundaries, or the other way around. And there's no shame in that too. Again, it's just a muscle that you need to learn, and learn how to do it actually. And step by step, you can learn how to set better boundaries. So this was the first video. There will be another video about how to actually set boundaries. And I'm really looking forward to that video as well. If you want to learn more about me, subscribe to my channel. And yes, oh, I talked a lot, but yeah, subscribe to my channel, like the video, check out the link if I currently offer something, and hope you have a beautiful day. See you soon.